The breaking point, the grand chamber of the celestial assembly, floated in the void between stars, a massive station that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic peace. Today, that peace was dying. Chancellor Vryn of the Talseth stood at the central podium, his crystalline skin reflecting the holographic displays that surrounded him. Each display showed the same terrible story. Red markers spread across the star map like a plague, consuming system after system. The Krith were coming and nothing could stop them. Another fleet has fallen, Vryn announced, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance of his species. The 7th defense line collapsed 3 hours ago. Admiral Kelrin's armada was completely destroyed. 200 ships, gone. The assembly chamber held representatives from 47 species, each one among the most advanced civilizations in known space. They had technology that could reshape planets, weapons that could ignite stars, shields that could withstand the fury of supernovas. None of it mattered against the Krith. In the back row, almost forgotten in the shadows, sat Ambassador Marcus Reed of Earth. He was a thin man in his late 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. His simple black uniform stood in stark contrast to the elaborate robes and biomechanical suits worn by the other delegates. He had been sitting in this chamber for 3 years, mostly ignored, occasionally mocked. Humans were the newcomers, the primitives who had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. "How is this possible?" demanded Senator Quarix of the Vrelian Confederacy. His forearms gestured wildly at the displays. "We have quantum disruption fields. We have molecular phase cannons. The Krith should not be able to withstand our assault." High Scientist Mirax of the Enlightened Collective stood, her luminescent form pulsing with distress. "That is precisely the problem, Senator. The Krith do not withstand our weapons. They absorb them. They consume the technology and recreate it within hours, sometimes minutes. Every weapon we deploy becomes a weapon they can use against us." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Everyone understood what this meant. The more they fought, the stronger the Krith became. "Explain this absorption process," Yer said, General Thax of the Corvian Empire. The massive reptilian warrior had fought in 20 campaigns and never lost. Now fear showed in his golden eyes. Mirax manipulated the holographic controls. An image appeared showing a Krith vessel. It looked organic, with dark metallic surfaces that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. The Krith are a hybrid species, part biological, part technological. When they encounter new technology, their ships literally consume samples of it. Their biology breaks it down at the molecular level, and their integrated artificial intelligence systems reverse engineer the principles. Within a combat cycle, they can reproduce the technology and develop countermeasures. "That's impossible," Quarix protested. "Our technology is based on principles that took us millennia to develop." "And yet they do it," Mirax replied quietly. "We have documented cases. The Helix civilization used gravity manipulation weapons. The Krith absorbed them. Within 2 days, the Krith had gravity weapons and gravity shields. The Talseth deployed quantum displacement bombs. The Krith now use quantum displacement drives. Every advantage we have used has been turned against us." Marcus Reed had been listening carefully. He raised his hand slightly, a gesture so small that most missed it, but Chancellor Vryn noticed. "Ambassador Reed," Vryn said, his tone neither welcoming nor hostile. "You wish to speak?" Every head turned toward Marcus. Some delegates looked curious. Most looked annoyed. The human had no right to speak during a military crisis. Earth controlled only 3 systems. Their technology was laughably primitive by galactic standards. They had been under observation protocols for 80 years, restricted and monitored to ensure they didn't become a threat. Marcus stood slowly. "Chancellor honored delegates, I have a question for High Scientist Mirax." Mirax's luminescent form dimmed slightly, the equivalent of a frown. "Proceed. You said the Krith absorb and replicate technology. Does this work with all technology or only advanced technology?" Mirax paused. We have only observed them encountering advanced technology. They have not engaged with primitive systems because no spacefaring civilization uses primitive technology anymore." "Except us," Marcus said quietly. A few delegates laughed. Senator Quarix's voice dripped with contempt. "Is the human suggesting we fight with lasers and ballistic weapons? Perhaps we should throw rocks at them." More laughter echoed through the chamber. But Marcus didn't sit down. He waited until the laughter died. "Senator, how long ago did your people stop using kinetic weapons in space combat?" Quarix waved a hand dismissively. 6,000 years ago, we evolved beyond such crude methods. And the Talseth? Chancellor Vrin's crystalline face showed no emotion. 8,000 years for us. Marcus looked around the chamber. Every species here has followed the same path. You advanced your technology, always moving forward, always seeking more sophisticated weapons and defenses. The Krith have adapted to that path because they follow the same logic. They expect energy weapons, quantum effects, gravitational manipulation. They've built their entire absorption strategy around advanced physics. General Thax leaned forward. What are you suggesting, human? I'm suggesting that my people never had the chance to follow that path. We've been restricted, remember? Our military technology has been frozen at the level it was when you found us. We still use chemical propulsion alongside our basic FTL drives. We still use kinetic weapons because we weren't allowed to develop energy weapons. We still use explosive warheads because we were forbidden from researching quantum displacement. The chamber fell silent. Understanding began to dawn on some faces, horror on others. You want us to release humanity from the observation protocols? Vrin said slowly. You want us to let you fight? No, Marcus said, and his voice was suddenly harder than steel. I want you to stop preventing us from helping. You put chains on us 80 years ago because you were afraid of what we might become. Now you're facing extinction, and those chains are the only thing stopping you from accessing the one military force in the galaxy that the Krith aren't adapted to fight. You're primitives, Quarix spat. Your weapons are antiques. The Krith would destroy you in minutes. Maybe, Marcus agreed, but they'd have to figure out how first. And while they're trying to understand why we're throwing 1,000-year-old technology at them, maybe that gives you a chance. Maybe it gives everyone a chance. High Scientist Myrax was running calculations on her holographic display. Her luminescent form pulsed rapidly. Chancellor, he may be correct. The Krith absorption process requires understanding the underlying principles. If they encounter technology that operates on different principles than they expect, technology they consider obsolete and irrelevant, their adaptation cycle could be significantly delayed. How long? Thax demanded. Unknown. Days, perhaps. Maybe longer. Their biology might even reject obsolete technology as non-viable for absorption. Senator Quarix stood. This is madness. We're discussing unleashing the humans. Have you all forgotten why we placed them under observation? They're violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. They fought wars among themselves for their entire history until we found them. They have weapons designed specifically to kill other humans. They're savages. Marcus met Quarix's eyes. Yes, we are. We've been fighting and surviving on a death world for 200,000 years. We've fought each other, fought our environment, fought extinction events, and we're still here. Can any of you say the same? The Vrelian senator had no answer. Chancellor Vrin spoke slowly. If we release humanity from the observation protocols, there will be no going back. We cannot put those chains back on once removed. You will have full access to our technology, our knowledge, our resources. You could become more dangerous than the Krith. Marcus nodded. That's possible. But right now you have a choice. Face certain extinction from the Krith or take a chance on us. At least with us, there's a possibility of survival. The debate lasted for 6 hours. Arguments raged back and forth. Some delegates spoke of principles, of the dangers of unleashing a species known for its violence. Others spoke of survival, of desperate times requiring desperate measures. Some believed humanity might offer a solution. Others believed humanity would simply become the next threat. Finally, Chancellor Vrin called for a vote. It was the most important vote in the Assembly's 10,000-year history. The results appeared on the displays. 26 in favor, 21 against. The motion passed by the smallest possible margin. Vrin's voice was heavy. The observation protocols on humanity are hereby terminated. Earth is granted full membership in the Celestial Assembly, with all rights and responsibilities. Ambassador Reed, your people are free to act as they see fit. Marcus pulled out a small communication device, something so primitive it didn't even use quantum entanglement. He pressed a button. Earth Command, this is Ambassador Reed. Authorization code Alpha 77 Omega. The chains are off. Wake up the fleet. It's time to show them who we are. On the other end of that call, Admiral Patricia Chen received the message she had been waiting 3 years to hear. Around Earth, around Mars, around the colonies that humanity had been confined to, lights began activating. Shipyards that had been building in secret powered up. Weapons that had been designed in isolation were loaded. Crews that had been training for a war they thought would never come received their orders. The human fleet began to move. 200 ships left Earth space heading toward the war. They were smaller than assembly vessels. Their hulls were patchwork combinations of old and new. Their weapons were a bizarre mix of railguns, missiles, lasers, and technologies that no other species had used in millennia. In the assembly chamber, delegates watched the human fleet on their displays. Some felt hope. Others felt fear. A few felt both. Marcus stood at the window looking out at the stars. He remembered the day the assembly had found Earth, the day they had looked at humanity and decided they were too dangerous to be free. He remembered the restrictions, the monitoring, the constant judgment. Now they would see what happens when you cage an animal, and then ask it to fight for you now. They would see what humanity had been building in the shadows. Now they would learn what it meant to unleash the humans. The Krith were coming, and humanity was ready. Calculated chaos, the human fleet emerged from FTL space at the edge of the Draken system, and every sensor on every assembly ship locked onto them in confusion. Admiral Patricia Chen stood on the bridge of the UESS Defiant, her flagship. She was a stocky woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and gray streaks in her black hair. Her uniform was practical, covered in pockets and equipment loops. Behind her, the bridge crew worked at stations that looked ancient compared to assembly technology. Physical switches, backup manual controls, redundant systems built upon redundant systems. Assembly fleet is hailing us, Admiral, her communications officer reported. Put them through. The view screen flickered to life showing General Thax. The massive Corvian warrior looked at the human ships with barely concealed skepticism. Admiral Chen, welcome to the front line. We've prepared a position for your fleet in the rear support group. Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. General, with respect, we didn't come here to provide support. Where's the fight? Thax's golden eyes narrowed. The Krith are currently attacking the fourth planet. We are attempting to hold the orbital stations while we evacuate civilians. However, our defensive line is collapsing. We estimate 6 hours before complete system loss. Then we'd better get moving. Patricia turned to her tactical officer. Commander Hayes, plot an intercept course. All ships, combat formation Delta 7. Admiral, Thax's voice rose sharply. You cannot engage the Krith directly. They will absorb your technology and, General, you freed us so we could fight our way. Now let us fight. Patricia cut the transmission. The human fleet moved forward in a formation that made assembly observers shake their heads. There was no elegant geometry, no perfectly spaced intervals. The ships clustered together in groups that seemed almost random, moving in patterns that defied conventional tactical doctrine. On the bridge of his flagship, General Thax watched the humans advance toward the Krith fleet. He had seen dozens of battles against the Krith. He knew how this would end. The humans would fire their weapons. The Krith would absorb the technology. Within minutes, the human fleet would be destroyed and the Krith would be stronger. He prepared to order a rescue operation for any survivors. The Krith fleet detected the human ships. 200 dark vessels changed course, moving to intercept. They flowed through space like a school of predatory fish, their hulls rippling with absorbed technology from a dozen conquered civilizations. Krith fleet closing, Commander Hayes reported. Distance, 50,000 kilometers and closing. Weapons range in 30 seconds, the tactical officer added. Patricia stood with her hands behind her back, watching the enemy approach. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. Remember your training. Remember what makes us different. We don't fight clean. We don't fight fair. We fight to win. Weapons free in 3, 2, 1 on fire. The human fleet opened fire, and the Krith fleet learned something new. Instead of energy weapons, instead of quantum disruptors or molecular phase cannons, the humans fired solid metal projectiles. Railguns accelerated tungsten slugs to a fraction of light speed. Missiles with chemical explosive warheads streaked through space. Laser weapons, ancient and crude by assembly standards, lanced out toward the enemy. The Krith fleet's sensors detected the incoming fire, and their absorption protocols activated. They began sampling the projectiles, analyzing the technology. Their biological components started breaking down the metal slugs. Their AI systems began modeling the propulsion methods. Then the projectiles hit. At relativistic speeds, a solid metal slug didn't need exotic physics to be deadly. Kinetic energy alone punched through Krith hulls. Chemical explosives detonated against shields designed to disperse energy, not contain physical blasts. Laser weapons, dismissed as primitive, burned through armor that had been optimized against more advanced threats. 15 Krith ships exploded in the first salvo. On Thax's bridge, every officer stood in shocked silence. The humans had just done what no assembly fleet had accomplished in months. They had damaged the Krith without the Krith immediately adapting. Impossible, breathed Thax's tactical officer. But it was happening. The human fleet pressed forward, firing continuously. More Krith ships fell. The Dark Fleet tried to adapt, tried to understand these weapons, but their absorption process was confused. The technology was too simple, too primitive. Their advanced systems kept trying to find the sophisticated principles underlying the attacks and finding nothing. Krith fleet is breaking formation, Hayes reported. They're attempting to flank us. Predictable, Patricia said. Execute Delta 7B. The human fleet suddenly scattered in every direction. Ships broke off individually, moving in erratic patterns. Some accelerated hard, others decelerated. A few spun in place, firing in seemingly random directions. It looked like chaos, like a fleet that had lost all coordination. It was exactly what Patricia wanted. The Krith fleet, adapted to fighting coordinated assembly tactics, didn't know how to respond to chaos. Their absorption AI tried to model the human behavior, tried to find the pattern. There was no pattern. Every human ship acted independently, captains making their own decisions, adapting to local conditions without waiting for orders. A Krith cruiser moved to intercept the human destroyer UESS Relentless. The destroyer didn't try to evade. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the Krith ship, firing its railguns continuously. The Krith vessel fired back with absorbed energy weapons, scoring hits on the destroyer's hull. The destroyer kept coming. What is that ship doing? Thax demanded, watching the display. The Relentless closed to point-blank range with the Krith cruiser. Then it launched a full spread of missiles. Not sophisticated quantum torpedoes. Simple chemical warhead missiles with proximity fuses. The explosions ripped through both ships. The Krith cruiser's shields, designed to disperse energy across its surface, couldn't handle the physical concussion of multiple explosive detonations at close range. The dark hull fractured and the ship broke apart. The Relentless survived barely. Its hull was scorched and venting atmosphere, but the crew had sealed themselves in emergency compartments. The destroyer limped away, still firing at other targets. They're insane, someone on Thax's bridge whispered. They're absolutely insane. Patricia watched the battle unfold on her displays. Yes, she thought, we probably are. But insanity was what happened when you spent 80 years building a military in secret, knowing you might never get to use it, preparing for a war you weren't allowed to fight. Humanity had taken all that frustration, all that anger at being caged, and weaponized it. Admiral, we're losing the marathon, Hayes reported. Hull breach on decks 3 through 7. They're requesting permission to withdraw. Denied, Patricia said coldly. Tell them to ram the nearest Krith vessel if they're going down. Hayes hesitated only a moment before relaying the order. On the marathon, Captain Rodriguez received the command and smiled grimly. If they were dying anyway, they'd take some Krith with them. The battle raged for 2 hours. The Krith fleet was larger and had absorbed technology from multiple advanced civilizations. The human fleet was smaller and using weapons that were millennia old by galactic standards. But the humans had something the Krith couldn't absorb: unpredictability. Patricia ordered tactics that no rational commander would use. She sent ships on suicide runs. She concentrated fire on targets that didn't matter while ignoring strategic objectives. She split her fleet into smaller groups that should have been easily destroyed, then had them support each other in ways that made no tactical sense. The Krith absorption AI couldn't process it. Every time it modeled human behavior and prepared a counter-strategy, the humans changed tactics. They fired railguns, then switched to missiles, then back to lasers. They attacked from angles that exposed their vulnerable points. They retreated when they were winning and charged when they were losing. It was chaos. It was madness. It was working. Krith fleet is withdrawing, Hayes announced in disbelief. They're pulling back from the planet. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. All ships pursue. Don't let them regroup. But General Thax's voice cut through the calm. "Admiral Chen, stop. Your fleet is damaged. You've lost 30 ships. You need to withdraw and regroup. General, we've got them confused. We press now while we have the advantage." "You don't understand," Thax insisted. "The Krith will adapt. They always do. They're withdrawing to process what they've learned. When they return, they'll be ready for your tactics." Patricia turned to face the view screen. "Then we'll use different tactics. General, you've been fighting the Krith the same way for months. Logical, strategic, by-the-book military doctrine. We don't have a book. We make it up as we go. That's our advantage." She cut the transmission and turned back to her crew. "All ships reform on my position. We're going after them." The human fleet pursued the Krith through the Draken system. Every time the dark ships tried to regroup, human vessels appeared from unexpected angles, firing weapons that shouldn't have been effective. The Krith absorbed samples of human railguns and created their own versions. But when they deployed them, the humans had switched to using laser weapons. The Krith adapted to lasers, and the humans went back to missiles. It was a deadly game of adaptation versus chaos, and chaos was winning. Finally, the Krith fleet jumped to FTL, abandoning the system entirely. They had never retreated before. They had never left a system unconquered. But the human fleet had broken something fundamental in their absorption process. They needed time to process, to analyze, to understand how to fight an enemy that refused to be predictable. On the Defiance bridge, cheers erupted from the crew. They had won. The Krith had fled. Patricia didn't cheer. She looked at the casualty reports. 37 ships destroyed, 12,000 humans dead. The victory had cost them nearly 20% of their fleet. "Open a channel to the assembly fleet," she ordered. General Thax appeared on screen. The Corvian warrior looked at Patricia with something approaching respect. "Admiral, that was... I have no words." "You defeated them." "We made them run," Patricia corrected. "That's not the same as defeating them. They'll be back and they'll have started adapting to our methods. So what do we do?" Patricia smiled, and this time there was real humor in it. "We keep being unpredictable. We keep using old technology mixed with new. We keep fighting in ways that don't make sense. The Krith are intelligent, General. Maybe too intelligent. They expect logic, strategy, sophistication. We give them chaos." High Scientist Myrax's luminescent form appeared on the split screen. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the battle. The Krith absorption process was disrupted because they couldn't classify your technology. It was neither primitive enough to ignore, nor advanced enough to prioritize. You existed in a gap in their understanding." "Good," Patricia said. "We'll keep existing in that gap. We'll keep being the thing they can't figure out." Over the next few weeks, the human fleet fought alongside assembly forces in 6 more engagements. Each time they used different tactics, different weapon combinations, different strategies. Sometimes they won, sometimes they lost. But every battle confused the Krith a little more, disrupted their adaptation a little further. The assembly began studying human tactics. They started incorporating unpredictability into their own strategies. They dusted off old technologies from their archives and mixed them with modern weapons. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't sophisticated. But it worked. 3 months after the observation protocols were lifted, the tide of the war began to turn. The Krith were still dangerous, still powerful, but they were no longer unstoppable. They had encountered something they couldn't absorb. Human unpredictability, human chaos, human refusal to fight fair. In the assembly chamber on Concordia Prime, Chancellor Vryn addressed the gathered delegates. "The humans have taught us something valuable. We spent millennia advancing our technology, making it more sophisticated, more elegant, more powerful. We forgot that sometimes the simple answer is the right answer. Sometimes chaos defeats order. Sometimes you need to fight like survivors, not like civilized beings." Ambassador Marcus Reed stood in his usual spot in the back row. But now, when delegates looked at him, they no longer saw a primitive from a restricted species. They saw the representative of the people who had saved them all. Senator Quarix approached Marcus after the session. The Vrelian who had once mocked humanity now spoke quietly. "Ambassador, I owe you an apology. I called your people savages. I was wrong." Marcus shook his head. "No, Senator, you were right. We are savages. We're violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. But we're also survivors. And sometimes that's exactly what the galaxy needs." The war against the Krith continued. It would rage for another year before humanity's tactics, combined with assembly technology, finally pushed the Dark Fleet back into the void from which it came. The cost was terrible. Millions died. Hundreds of worlds were scarred by battle, but the galaxy survived, and humanity, once caged and restricted, once feared and dismissed, had proven something important. They had shown that sophistication wasn't always strength, that chaos could defeat order, that sometimes the most advanced civilizations needed the most primitive warriors. The chains were off. Humanity was free, and the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Patricia Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiant looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there other threats were waiting. Other challenges would come. But now humanity would face them not as prisoners but as equals. Not as primitives but as survivors. She had lost 12,000 people proving that point. She would remember every name, carry every death, honor every sacrifice. But she would not regret unleashing what humanity had become. Because when all hope died, when the civilized galaxy faced extinction, they had learned a fundamental truth. Sometimes you need monsters to fight monsters. Sometimes you need chaos to defeat order. Sometimes you need to unleash the humans.